Welcome to the Faithful Fathering Podcast. Thank you for joining us. This is Rick Wirtz, founder and president of Faithful Fathering, where the mission is to encourage and equip dads to be faithful fathers, to prioritize physical presence, be engaged emotionally, and lead spiritually by example. So this podcast series, we're looking at charging dads to step up, initiating discussion around stepping into these three tenets of faithful fathering. But before I introduce our guest again, I do want to again point you to the Faithful Fathering website, faithfulfathering.org, where you can click on the For Dads button to access our vlogs and studies that really complement these podcasts. So as always, we want to keep this a very practical discussion. Always welcome your feedback. If you want to give us a call or email us, you can access those on our website as well. But I pray this blesses you on your journey as the man, husband, and father the Lord's calling you to be. So in the studio with me again is dear friend Matt Hammersky. He's pastor of Risen Nation Church, also a husband and father. So welcome again, Matt.
Yeah, glad to be here, man.
We just touched on, those that hadn't tuned in, we had touched on the prioritizing physical presence in the previous podcast. Matt is a young dad, has been married 12 years, has a son that you adopted, correct?
Finalizing, yeah.
Finalizing in the process of adopting, but engaged in the foster care system and moved forward from there. So he has a lot of ups and downs and things he shared, but this tenet of faithful fathering is actually engaging emotionally with our kids, being engaged emotionally. And emotions, this isn't exactly a manly term, is it? This emotion thing?
Yeah, it definitely hasn't gotten that rap for sure. I think men don't cry has been the dominating thing for a long time.
Not in public, anyway.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Not in public. Yes, definitely.
Well, and being that you have a son and not a daughter, daughters, of course, tend to be more emotional. More emotional, but not always. I don't want to broad brush that, but I was blessed to have both a daughter and a son, and it was certainly more. There was just my own emotions because of the way I came across. You mentioned that sometimes you would there would be an intensity or just a frustration come out, and I found one of the big wake up calls I got as a dad was when my daughter was actually shared with her mom that she was scared of me.
Yeah.
Because I always say I played tennis because I couldn't find 9 other guys as mad at the world as I was to compete with, and that was just my release, was just to lay it out there physically on the tennis court, all on my own deal, not relying on anybody else.
Yeah. And
with that, of course, came along some intensity that I wasn't even aware of, just the way I would look and the way I would come across. So, that's a shot to the soft underbelly when one of the most important people in your whole life are a little bit fearful of you. So that started a whole new journey. So tell us a little bit about how you've short-circuited the idea of being emotionally engaged with your son as in this journey toward adoption.
So for him, I know he's come from the background. He puts on a very tough front. So you're not going to, even just crying, he would have these what we call them meltdowns, because that's what they were. And he would get very aggressive, very angry, and very hurt just over past things that have happened. And as a child, you don't have the tools to deal with that pain. It just got to come out. And that's even a biblical principle, out of the heart, the mouth speaks. And it's like somehow or some way your behavior is going to manifest the hurt that's inside, because your body can only take so much. And so it'll start, and that's when he would have these episodes, and they would be very emotional on the anger spectrum. And so when we started to really kind of break down these things, and I would have to restrain him sometimes for an hour and a half of just holding him in this hold while he just loses his mind and screams and yells and is cursing at you and is trying to hit you. I've been bit multiple times. You just tons of things, right? And I'm thinking in this, I'm like, what did I get myself into? This is insane. Sure. But at the end of all of them, it would always you would hear him start to kind of sob, and there would just be this, and it was kind of like he would come back, right, from this losing himself completely. And then afterwards we'd have these conversations, and the more he began to trust me, the more I noticed that he would start to actually, like when he would do something that he knew he shouldn't have done, or he would say something in anger, you'd catch him, he'd try to hide, but he'd be crying in his room, he'd be hiding and crying. And because he was dealing with the fact that he just hurt somebody that he actually cares about. And so that began to connect, which when you start to see that, they'll tell you that's a great sign, because one, you've got somebody that's gone through so much abuse, they're at risk of becoming a sociopath, of not being able to empathize with people anymore.
Right.
And so the fact that he can empathize with, I just hurt them and it hurt me, that was huge. And we're like, oh, good, And so, but I would come in those times and show him, even in the midst of that, I said, hey man, it's good to cry. You can't, it's okay. It's okay to cry. And there'd be times when I would go and like, he would share with me kind of things that had happened to him in the past. And some of the stuff I knew about because I read it in his file. Some of it I didn't. Right. And he would tell me stuff, and I would cry in front of him as he's sharing what has happened to him. Sure. And he kind of look at me, and I would just tell him, buddy, I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I'm sorry I didn't know you yet. I said, because if I would have been there, I would have protected you. And I said, but I can promise you that's never going to happen to you again. Yeah. And so, we would have these moments, and I think showing him that, I would cry in the midst of these meetings. Now, I'm not a big crier, but there are times I cry when I'm in the presence of the Lord. Sure. I'll cry. Sure.
Real men cry.
Yeah. Oh yeah. and it's, or when, spending time or having these moments with my wife where you're just kind of bearing your soul and talking about what you've been going through and the frustration, all those kind of things. I think the stigma of that is going away, which is great. But even my dad, there was a moment I remember my dad, he felt like he had failed me in certain areas, and he began crying and was just trying to talk to me about it. And he was, just really, and I'll never forget that because I'd never seen my dad cry. Right. Up into that moment, I think I was 19 years old, and I'll never forget it. Sure. It left a mark of knowing how much my dad really cared about me. Sure. And I didn't really fully understand it until I saw that. Right. And so I think that connecting, engaging emotionally, it's hard for men at times, especially coming out of that era of you got to be tough, you got to be, and granted, there are times, look, you don't have time to cry, you don't have time to whine, you need to lead.
Suck it up.
Yeah, deal with it. But then there are times where you need to show that, hey, we just came out of a season where, look, I'm going to be honest with you, I was completely overwhelmed. I had to totally depend on the Lord. I didn't know if we were going to make it, but we did. And now that we did, I need to process. Like, I need to deal with what I've gone through. I need to go with a trusted person I can share this with, or even expressing how I feel to my son or to my wife about them. Right. Sure. And being open and raw with them, and then also them seeing me with that with the Lord, in worship, and in that, like, that's my wife will tell you that there's few times where Matt will cry, but I guarantee you if he's crying, it's because God is speaking, God is doing something, and that's, my heart is tender, to that. Well, and so anyway,
that's huge, because I know my son didn't see me cry until I lost one of the father figures in my life, and I realized at that point, just that we tend to think that only girls need us to connect with them emotionally. I always tell dads with girls, make sure you're hugging them even when they become teenagers. Yeah. Put those hugs on them, because if you don't hug them, somebody else will, and you might not like Mr. Somebody else, right? Yeah. But it's also true for our sons. I mean, there's a study years ago at UCLA that said everyone needs 8 to 10 touches a day for good emotional health, as well as encouraging words, right? Yeah. And dads aren't necessarily inclined to put a hug on their son or give him an attaboy or a slap on the back or whatever the case may be. But to this day, a 36-year-old son, we hug each other in public, and it's just part of who we are. Oh, yeah. And it's a good emotional connection all the way around. So not hiding your emotions. I do want to go back. You mentioned sympathy and empathy. Yeah. Can you explain the differences there? Why that was so important for him to be able to relate, to empathize?
Well, I mean, it shows your emotional development, as far as, if I'm able to empathize with somebody, as in, like, I can see what they're going through, and I can actually in some way put myself in their shoes and relate and say, oh, I can see why they're hurting, and then actually hurt with them, and say, and the Bible tells us that to rejoice together, to grieve together. And so that's part of your development. And as a kid that's coming from abuse, they don't get time to build that, because they're constantly in survival mode. So they immediately, that's part of foster care. When you're fostering a child, there's a thing called TBRI, trust-based relational intervention. And it's the way of helping a foster child heal that's been through a lot of hurt. And you basically have to rewire the brain, because their brain is wired a certain way to respond. Survival, exactly. And so they reach for, when something happens to them, they get triggered, right? They reach for the wrong thing. And so it's reworking those paths over and over again with them and teaching them how to reach for the right thing. And so the fact that we saw our son begin to have empathy, we were like, ooh, okay, we're making some breakthrough. you know.
Fantastic.
And so even though we just went through something like, oh my gosh, this was like knockdown, drag out argument, you know, all sorts of, and teenagers are already tough. I mean, you're dealing with hormones, you're dealing with everything. But on top of that, to be dealing with trauma, which is a whole different thing, you have to know how to respond to that. And so a lot of times parents, some of the people that have the most trouble fostering, I found, is that they have bio children. But you got to understand, when your biological children are born, they're born trusting you because you're there.
Right.
These kids do not.
Right.
And so when you think, oh, I'm just disciplining them because I love you, they're not receiving that.
Right.
You're just building on the trauma they have.
Right.
And so you have to do it a different way. And part of that, engaging emotionally, is so important. Like I said, when he would have these, he just recently actually, him and my wife got in a bit of an argument, and they both triggered each other, because when the last time he was placed with us, him and my wife butted heads constantly, and he constantly rejected her because he had so much anger for his bio mom.
Right.
So he projected it onto her. And so she had to deal with that constantly, of someone who just wanted to be a mom to him, you know, being rejected.
Right.
And so she got mad, she left, and he was mad, he went up in his room. And so this was all happening on a Sunday. And I'm like, she goes to me, she's like, well, he's not going to church. We'll deal with it later. I'm coming. And I was like, no, I'll be right there. So I stopped everything I was doing. I left, said, guys, I got to go. Just hold down the fort. I promise I'll be back before it's time for me to preach. And I go home, and I get home, and I go up to his room, and I'm like, you know, say his name's like Michael, you know, open the door. And you can see him, he's buried and everything. And you can hear him kind of sobbing. And I try and pull the covers off of him to talk to him, and he's like, no, you know, he starts going to this, like, he's angry, and he's trying to control himself. I can see it, you know, he's really trying to control himself. And so I just pick him up, and I grabbed him, and I looked at him, I grabbed his like face like this, and I looked at him, I was like, hey, and then it was like, I'm not mad at you. And he stopped, and he looked at me, he was like, he kind of just stopped for a second, he's like, kind of breathed, you know, and I'm just holding him, and I said, dude, I love you. I said, but we gotta figure out what's going on. What's wrong? And he began to explain what had happened and the way he took it. And I said, okay, well, you know, and I began to tell him, you know, Sydney, I was like, my wife was like, she doesn't mean it like that, buddy. You know, she was just upset. I said, just like sometimes you get upset, you lose control. Same thing. We all do. It's like, so, you know, she didn't mean it like that. And, you know, all this kind of thing. And as we worked through it and he saw that, we connected emotionally, you know, and he quickly got himself ready, got up. I said, do you want to go to church? He said, yeah. And I said, okay. So we went down and got in the car and made it back to church in time, and everything was good. And the rest of the day was great. And, you know, and my wife came to him and apologized to him. She said, look, I said some things I shouldn't have said. I reacted in a way that wasn't right. I'm sorry. Like, but then here's the issue we have that you contributed to, right? Here's the thing we got to work through. And at that point, he's listening, he's receiving. He said, yes, ma'am. Yes, and he you know, received it. Right. But again, there's that emotional connection to start with.
If you can stabilize the emotions,
yes,
then you can connect emotionally and then get on with the program.
Oh yeah. So. And just like you're saying, that physical touch of constantly hugging, and we did that love language test with him recently, and his big one is physical touch. And so like I'll constantly, you know, more my dad, he gave me the hey, you know, and everyone's, but he wasn't a big, you know, kind of touchy feely person in general.
More noogies than hugs.
Yes, like it was more pranks, and that was I love you, and you know. But for Michael, the way he receives love is that hand on the shoulder, that hug, that, you know, sometimes he would just come down and he'd be like, hey, he'd just be asking me a question, and he'd kind of look at me, and then he'd be like, he'd just kind of open up his arms like this, like he wants a hug, and then I'd give him a hug, or he'd ask, hey, can I get a hug? I'm like, yeah, you can get a hug, you know. So I definitely feel like I have become much more of a loving person, like showing affection through that process of understanding that's what he needs, and also my wife too. It's a big thing for her. Sure. Constant. She sent me that article, 8 hugs a day. You know, she was like, and she told me, you don't hug me long enough. That's what she used to tell me. And so, like, just being very intentional with that and understanding the power you have as a father and as a husband. Yeah. You know, when you're willing to hold tight, and that protection they feel and that security they feel is huge.
Yeah. I always say the 8-second hug is the one that I always reference, and I said, you know, if you realize, you know, women and, you know, particularly those in the foster care system, what they lack, and a lot of times they're looking for in a relationship, is security. So if you hug your bride and you think about the 8-second reference, then around 6 or 7 seconds there's a you know. And I always tell guys, don't count out loud. You know, that isn't a bull. It isn't a bull ride. You know,
might send the wrong message.
But the point is, as you say, the emotionally, and the hug is a conveyance of security, of the mutual engagement in this relationship, that there's a secure dimension, and you're not going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And you also mentioned that you had a mutual love for music.
Yes.
So there's an extracurricular activity that he enjoys that happens to be in your wheelhouse as well. What a blessing that is. Huh?
Oh yeah, it's been a fun way to connect. He actually is going to start like legit drum lessons soon, which we're excited about. He's picked up drums. He's gotten really good really quick. And so I'm wanting somebody to take him next level. I'm not a bass has always been my jam, and so I know drums, but I'm not as good as someone that could take him to the next level with it. And so that has been cool to connect with him on that. He's also very artistic. He loves drawing. He's really big in the arts, which my wife is an amazing artist. She can draw, paint, everything, photography, all that. So they've been connecting on that. He's recently with his phone. He's gotten into. He's now. I'm gonna go take photos. He's very he wants to find spots to take cool photos. And so now my wife is being very intentional with him in that as well. And so again, just engaging him with those extracurricular activities. He loves basketball. We're encouraging him to go out for the team, but he's not quite ready yet as far as I think just personally, I think he feels a lot of anxiety about it, but he's very good. And so he's a natural athlete. I mean, he's, all the things that I'm into, he's into. So it really is an easy win for me. There's no excuse for me to not be able to engage with him on those levels. But even if it wasn't, I try to think of it like a daughter, is taking those interests, just a lot like I do with my wife. My wife will sometimes be interested in things that I don't really care about, but I care about her. So I show her that I care for her by caring about the things that she's interested in.
That's a great message, because I know you also mentioned there was a game that you didn't necessarily enjoy, but your son enjoys.
Oh yeah, right? And so we play together. He comes show, oh, look at these new skins I got this month and all this stuff, and my first thing is like, oh gosh, how much money did you spend getting all this stuff, and that's kind of but I'm like, no, this is important to him, right, and I try to think about how music early on was like that for me, and sometimes my parents didn't understand. I wanted to spend $1,200. I wanted this $1,200 bass guitar, and they're like, what's wrong with the $400 one, right? And so I try to keep that in front of me, and then so when I come in, I say, oh man, buddy, that looks great, that's cool, you did all that. Yeah, I was like, wow, look, you're that level. Yeah, dude, that's insane. And you see him just get more and more confident, more and more just full of joy, because I care.
Yeah. I think that's, I will say, my son was the athlete, which is very much up my wheelhouse, and my daughter was the musical theater one. That was a music, she had a gift of voice, God, the only instrument God makes, right?
The voice,
But I would say, would I have been as supportive if it was my son that was into musical theater and my daughter was into athletics? And I would pray I would be. But isn't that the message? It's the emotional engagement that helps us understand that the kids don't necessarily fall in love with what we want them to be or do.
Yeah.
It's getting in sync with how the Lord has uniquely gifted them, and how to encourage them in their unique giftedness. That any other suggestions on how you really tune into that?
I think it's a lot of we talked about in the previous episode is just being intentional and asking questions, and making sure they're doing something because they want to do it. Like we require Michael to be in an extracurricular of some type.
Sure.
And so we thought it was going to be basketball, but he said, I don't really want to go out for the team. And I said, okay, what do you want to do? And he said, well, I really like the drums. I said, okay, let's start getting you weekly drum lessons. And then they'll start putting you with other kids that play. You can play in like a band setting. They do like performances every quarter. I said, so you want to do that? Yeah, I'd love to do that. Okay, so let's do that. So it's like you're saying, not forcing what you want on them, but giving them options to choose. Right, and now specifically for all children, that's great. Giving them boundaries and letting them have some power in the choice. But it's obviously a boundary. It's saying, okay, you can do this or this, right?
Sure.
And for foster care, they encourage you to do that because these kids have had the power of choice taken away from them.
Right.
The majority of their life.
Right. And
so if you can give them choices, it really helps. And so from that choice, I saw him immediately light up, ooh, I want to do drums. Awesome, let's do it. And then he's like, maybe basketball next year. I'm like, maybe basketball next year. So just being intentional, asking questions, and reminding yourself, even if it's something you don't like, it doesn't discredit that it's still something important to them, and that it's still stuff that people do like.
Right,
you know,
right.
I understand like country music. I don't like country music.
I'm sorry.
But yeah, there's plenty of people. There's plenty of people that love country music, and I live in Houston,
I didn't know there was
Texas.
another kind of music.
There you go. So I live in Houston, Texas. There's tons of people who love country music. So it's not that I say, oh, country music is just horrible music, right? It's just not my thing.
Right.
Right, but it doesn't mean that it's if you like it, you're any less than me because I like this genre of music. You know, so it's that understanding, and also I can still appreciate it as music.
Sure.
So same thing.
Good.
Kind
Well,
of principle.
and for the dads out there that are younger dads with younger kids, with biological kids or just a younger framework, I always encourage getting involved in at least, like you say, an extracurricular activity, which would be, I always say, soccer is one because it sets a kid up for cardiovascular for life. You know, they're out there running around.
Yeah, he's also really good at soccer.
And then swimming is another because every kid needs to learn how to swim. Plus, it teaches parents patience.
Yes.
If you can make it through a swim season, you've done quite a bit.
Yeah.
But I do like, you don't ever limit your children. You have to keep your sanity.
Oh, yes.
But I always am cautious about limiting kids to one or two activities. They've got to find their bent.
Yeah.
So expose them as best you can to music, to art, to piano, to sports, to different sports, that type of thing. But the challenge, one thing I would always say is, once you start a season, and you can validate whether this is, obviously you're not into basketball yet, but you hadn't started that. But once you start a season, that's always my criteria is that you will finish the season, unless there's a big rift on the team or something like that. Yeah. But I think that that's part of the journey is that even if it does get a little bit rough, maybe you're not getting all the playing time you want to get or whatever, you still finish the season.
Yeah, you don't quit. Yeah.
Right. No quit there. So that how you say your son is turning 16. Are you teaching him to drive?
So I started when he was a little younger, when he would drive. So I have my car has a stick shift. And so he was obviously very interested in that just right off the go. And I think he'd seen like one of the Fast and the Furious movies. And so he was, all about it. And so I love cars. I love going fast. It's always been something I've been into. My dad used to read me growing up. It was Muscle Mustangs and Fast Fords magazines. He used to always show me all this stuff. So he got me into cars really early.
Ford Ferrari is your favorite movie?
That was a great movie. I love that movie. So I love cars. I love the sound of, just a really powerful engine, all those kind of things. And so early on he asked me about driving, so I've been showing him. My dad taught me really early. He started teaching me how to drive when I was like 13. And so by the time I was 16 I knew I was driving a stick shift. I was all sorts of stuff.
Cool.
So that I've begun teaching him how to drive. We're taking our time on that though, because the school is literally like right behind us, and so he rides his bike to school. I got him a really nice bike. He rides his bike to school, and so his favorite place is like McDonald's, which is right next to the school. So, we kind of we're taking it slow with him on that because his maturity is still behind where he would even a normal 16-year-old would be because of all the things. But he's maturing quickly, but it is taking some time. So, we'll probably wait a little while longer than that. But yeah, teaching him how to drive, getting involved with, I'd ask him questions. Hey, where are we? What should I do up here? Turning, all those kind of things. When do I use my blinker? When do I not use my blinker? Just teaching him along the way. One of my things my dad used to always teach me driving is he would say, he got on me one time really bad when he was driving with me because I slammed on my brakes last minute to stop at a yellow light. And he was like, what are you doing? I was like, well, I don't want to run the red light. He's like, no. He's like, you hesitated. He's like, and then you made a last minute decision. He's like, that'll get you into trouble. He's like, don't hesitate. He's like, make a decision and do it. Just go. Don't decide halfway through you're gonna try and stop. He's like, 'cause somebody could have rear-ended you. Somebody could have, And he used to make me do that all the time, looking, several cars ahead, looking around you, constantly checking your mirrors. That was my dad, like nonstop, just constant. And so it's still with me today. I drive and I'm constantly checking. I'm looking, and all those kind of things. But I just love driving in general, and he does have a passion for it. I'm one of those weird people that just like to drive.
Well, I'm proud of you because there's too many dads miss out on that opportunity. And looking back, that was some of the best one-on-one time I had with the kids. The windshield time, and there were several benefits. Number one is, you got to talk a lot more.
Yeah.
You had the comfort factor that you taught them how to drive. You
Yes.
didn't abdicate that to anybody else. So
Yeah.
you have complete confidence when you hand the keys over to them.
Yeah.
And you've worked through the process. So
For sure.
And you've obviously crossed a pretty big threshold together. And
Yes.
that's a huge deal.
Yeah.
Finally, is there anything on the emotional engagement piece when you're focused on being engaged emotionally as the kids mature? Our challenge a lot of times is maturing in relationship with them as they mature. So I know it's early in the process, and as a 16-year-old, are there any thoughts or do you have any plans on one-on-one time? I always think of a weekend retreat or an extended trip. As he matures, looks to jobs or job opportunities or college, and those trips are things that you take as a father-son. Do you have any plans, or have you thought ahead to say, what would that want? You say like to travel.
Yeah.
Do you see some of those as being guide trips? By chance?
No, for sure. We're looking right now. He likes roller coasters a lot, which I love roller coasters. And so, right now we're talking about taking a very short trip over to San Antonio, spend a couple days, hit up Six Flags there a couple days, and just spending time with him in that way. For his birthday, I've been asking him what he wants, and he's like, well, I'd like to go maybe on a trip or, those kind of things. So, planning, I've been looking at different ways of trips we can take as families together, just the three of us, and then also as just me and him. We've spent a lot of time in a car together because when he was at that residential treatment center for a good stint of time, I was having to go out there every weekend to visit him. Mm-hmm. I wasn't having to, but I was going out there every weekend, and it was about an hour and 15 minutes away from us. And so I'd pick him up, and then we'd come back towards the closest city, which I think was Cypress, and we'd do all sorts of stuff, and then we'd drive back out there, so a lot of drive time together, a lot of riding in the car together, and so just being intentional. And we've had all sorts of conversations, and now that he's in school, we talk about the things that kids deal with nowadays, and we have very open dialogue about those things. He's obviously had some experiences way before he should have, and so now we're upfront, honest about those kind of things, and just talk about it. And I explained to him, as he gets in high school, brings in we were just talking about earlier, the purity talk, all those kind of things. But explaining to him the beautiful thing of relationships, God's beautiful design of sex, and all those kind of things, as he's going to be dealing with that. But why it's so important, why he should value his body, and why he should value others around him.
Sure.
And he does. He asks me questions. He's very engaged, very involved. And he'll even ask me, what does the Bible say about this, and stuff like that. He's kind of learned in that language. So it's been really cool. He's a very deep thinker. That could be due to the fact that he's been in therapy since he was 7. That might be part of it. But
they get you deep.
Yeah, they get you to ask some questions.
But what I'm hearing, though, is that he really feels, or you've established your home and your relationship as a safe place for him to come emotionally.
Yeah, and that's what I tell him. I said, even when you make mistakes, even when you do things you knew you shouldn't have done, you can always bring them to me, and we'll work through it together. Right. That it's never, you're not too far gone. You're not, you don't need to hide it. Like, there's no point in hiding it. We're going to find out anyway. I always tell him he's a terrible liar. I mean, he really is. He'll say something, and you just look at him like, you're lying. And he'll kind of crack, and he'll laugh, and he'll be like, yeah, I'm lying. And just like, and with foster kids, they lie a lot for defense.
Sure.
And so one of the things we try to always say to him when that happens is say, hey man, I look forward to the day you trust me enough to just tell me the truth right away. And so we do. We want to keep that place, that kind of way in our home, that it's a safe place to tell the truth, even if the truth is uncomfortable. You're not going to get, this, it's just going to be this real angry response. It's going to be well, now we deal with it, and take it that way.
Good. Well, dads, I hope you're listening to the wise words spoken by Matt here, that the idea of being engaged emotionally is all about keeping doors open to connect with your son or your daughter, so they always know it's a safe place. It may be to mom first, it may be to dad first, it doesn't matter, but they need to know that the home and the church are safe places to come with challenges that they're facing, whether they be the wonderful issues around pornography that are rampant today, or other issues, whatever the challenges may be in their relationship. relationship. So dads, make note of this second tenet of faithful fathering after prioritizing physical presence is being engaged emotionally, so that you not only know your kids well, but you begin to get in sync with their unique giftedness and how they can glorify the Father as they mature in their lives. So Matt, thanks again for your words of wisdom. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, God bless, Godspeed. Tune in next time, and we'll look forward to talking to you. God bless.